Another ordinary day. The cardboard boxes stacked in my new bedroom seemed to mock me. 3 weeks since the move to Millbrook, and I still hadn't unpacked half of them. What was the point? Dad's job would probably transfer us again in 6 months anyway. I'm Elena Scott, and I'm 16 years old, which means I'm old enough to know that fresh starts are just adult speak for your life is about to get disrupted again. This latest move brought us from Phoenix to this sleepy Oregon town where the biggest excitement was apparently the annual Pumpkin Festival. Thrilling. My phone buzzed with another text from Maya, my best friend back home. How's the new place? Made any friends yet? I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Yeah, it's great. Tons of fun people here. The lies came easier each time. Downstairs, I could hear Mom and Dad's voices getting sharper. They'd been doing that a lot lately, starting conversations in normal tones that gradually escalated into barely contained arguments about money, about the move, about Dad's work schedule. They thought I couldn't hear them, but sound carried differently in this old house with its thin walls and creaky floors. Told you this position would be temporary. Can't keep uprooting Elena every time. Acting like this is my fault. I grabbed my headphones and cranked up my music, but it didn't really help. The tension in this house was thick enough to swim through. Outside my window, the Oregon rain drummed steadily against the glass. It had been raining for 5 straight days, which seemed impossible coming from Arizona's eternal sunshine. Everything here was different. The smell of wet earth instead of desert sage, the way the light filtered gray and soft through clouds instead of blazing bright and harsh. I flopped onto my bed and stared at the ceiling, counting the water stains that looked like abstract art. This was my life now. Boxes I didn't want to unpack, friends I'd left behind, parents who were slowly falling apart, and a new school where I was just the new girl who sat alone at lunch. The house settled around me with unfamiliar groans and sighs. Every old house had its personality, Dad always said. This one seemed tired and lonely, which made it a perfect match for me. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the house settling again, but this sound was different, softer, almost like giggling. I pulled off my headphones and listened harder. Scratch, scratch, giggle. It was coming from somewhere above my room. The attic, maybe? Great, we probably had mice, or rats, or knowing our luck, something worse. I grabbed my phone's flashlight and crept upstairs to the narrow attic door. The sound had stopped, but I could swear I heard something moving around up there. Tiny footsteps, maybe, or something being dragged across the floor. Hello, I called softly, feeling ridiculous. If you're a mouse, you better find somewhere else to live because I am not dealing with rodents on top of everything else. Silence. I was about to head back downstairs when I saw it. A brief flash of light from under the attic door. Not electric light, something warmer, more golden, like candlelight or fireflies. My heart started beating faster. Mice definitely didn't glow. I pressed my ear to the door and heard the softest whisper of movement, like silk brushing against wood. Then, clear as anything, I heard what sounded like a tiny sneeze. Whatever was up there, it wasn't a rodent. I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling slightly. This was either the start of the most interesting thing that had happened to me in months, or I was about to discover we had some very weird pest problems. The handle turned easily, and I pushed the door open. The attic was dark except for a thin beam of late afternoon light filtering through a small window. Dust motes danced in the air, and I could smell old wood and something else, something sweet, like vanilla and honey mixed together. I stepped inside, phone light scanning the cramped space. Boxes and old furniture created a maze of shadows, perfect hiding spots for whatever I'd heard. I know you're up here, I whispered. I heard you. A small sound, like a hiccup, came from somewhere near the far wall. I moved toward it carefully, trying not to trip over the accumulated junk of whoever had lived here before us. My phone light swept across a broken rocking chair, a stack of moldy books, a trunk with a rusted lock. And then I saw the eyes. 2 enormous, luminous green eyes staring at me from behind a cardboard box. They blinked once, slowly, and then disappeared, as whatever they belonged to scrambled away with a sound like tiny bells jingling. I stood frozen for a moment, my brain trying to process what I'd just seen. Those eyes had been too large for a mouse, too bright for a rat, too aware, intelligent. They looked almost human, but that was impossible. Wait, I called out, surprising myself. Don't run away. I'm not going to hurt you. The jingling sound stopped. I lowered my phone light and backed away from the box, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. I just want to see what you are. I promise I won't tell anyone. The silence stretched on so long I started to think I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe it had been a reflection, or my eyes playing tricks on me in the dim light. Maybe the stress of everything, the move, my parents, the loneliness, was finally getting to me. Then I heard it. The softest, most musical little voice, speaking words I couldn't quite understand. It sounded like wind chimes mixed with laughter, like the way sunlight might sound if it could talk. And just before I turned to leave, convinced I was losing my mind, I saw another flash of that golden light. This time, it seemed to pulse, like a tiny heartbeat made of starshine. I backed out of the attic slowly, my head spinning. Whatever was up there, it was real. It was alive. And somehow, impossibly, I thought it might be trying to communicate with me. I closed the door gently and stood in the hallway for a long moment, my heart racing with something that felt suspiciously like hope. For the first time since we'd moved to Millbrook, something interesting was happening. Something magical. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those luminous green eyes staring back at me. I kept listening for sounds from the attic, but the house remained stubbornly silent. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. I spent the day at school in a distracted haze, barely paying attention to my classes. My English teacher, Mrs. Patterson, asked me twice if I was feeling all right. I just nodded and tried to look like I was paying attention to her lecture about symbolism in To Kill a Mockingbird. But my mind was upstairs in that dusty attic, wondering what those eyes belonged to. The moment I got home, I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. A real one this time, not just my phone, and headed straight for the attic door. My parents were both still at work, which meant I could investigate without having to explain myself. The door opened with the same soft creak as before. I stepped inside and immediately smelled that sweet vanilla honey scent again, stronger this time. "Hello?" I called softly. "Are you still here?" This time, I was ready when I heard the tiny jingling sound. I turned toward it slowly, keeping my flashlight beam low so I wouldn't frighten whatever was hiding. "I brought some food," I said, pulling a granola bar from my backpack. "I don't know what you eat, but I thought you might be hungry." I placed the granola bar on the floor and backed away, sitting cross-legged near the door. Then I waited. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then I heard the softest whisper of movement, and something small darted between the shadows too quickly for me to see clearly. The granola bar rustled. I held very still, barely breathing, and watched as tiny hands, actual hands with delicate fingers, unwrapped the granola bar. They were pale and seemed to shimmer slightly in the dim light, like they were made of moonbeams. More rustling, and then a sound that was unmistakably satisfied munching. "Is it good?" I whispered. The munching stopped abruptly. Then, after a pause, I heard that bell-like voice again, and this time I caught what sounded like buried in the musical tones. My heart leaped. It understood me. It was answering. "What are you?" I asked gently. A long silence. Then, slowly, a small figure emerged from behind the box where I'd first seen those eyes. I had to bite my lip to keep from gasping out loud. It was about the size of a large hamster, but that was where any resemblance to a normal animal ended. It stood upright on two legs like a tiny person, with delicate hands that were currently holding a piece of granola. Its skin seemed to shift colors in the beam of my flashlight, pale silver, then soft gold, then the faintest hint of blue. But it was the wings that really took my breath away. They were translucent and delicate, like a dragonfly's wings but more elaborate, with patterns that looked almost like lace. They fluttered slightly as it moved, creating that jingling sound I'd been hearing. And its face, it was almost human, but with those enormous eyes that took up half its features. Right now, they were a warm amber color, watching me with unmistakable curiosity. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few seconds. Then it tilted its head to one side and made a sound that was definitely a question, though I had no idea what it was asking. "You're beautiful," I breathed. Its skin immediately shifted to a warm pink color, and it ducked its head shyly. Then it looked back up at me and pointed to itself with one tiny finger. "You want to know what I think you are?" I guessed. A vigorous nod that made its wings chime softly. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never seen anything like you. Are you magical?" Another nod, this one accompanied by what I was pretty sure was a proud expression. "What's your name?" It opened its mouth and made a series of sounds that were beautiful but completely incomprehensible to me. They sounded like wind chimes having a conversation with a babbling brook. "I can't understand that," I said apologetically. "Can you understand me, though?" A nod. "But you can't speak English?" A shake of the head, followed by a series of gestures that I interpreted as, "I can understand, but not speak." "That's okay, we can figure something out." I paused, studying this incredible little creature. "Do you have somewhere to go? Someone looking for you?" Its expression suddenly grew sad, and its skin shifted to a muted gray color. It shook its head and hugged itself with its tiny arms. My heart ached for it. Whatever it was, wherever it had come from, it was alone. Just like me. "Do you want to stay here?" I asked impulsively. "I mean, not in the attic. That's dusty and cold. But maybe in my room?" Its eyes went wide and its skin brightened to a golden yellow that practically glowed. It nodded so enthusiastically that it nearly fell over. "Okay, but there have to be rules," I said, trying to sound responsible even though I was making this up as I went along. "My parents can't see you, and neither can anyone at school. This has to be our secret, at least until I figure out what you are and where you came from. Deal?" It nodded again and then did something that made my heart melt. It held out one tiny hand toward me. I very carefully extended my finger and it grasped it with both of its hands, shaking solemnly like we were signing the world's smallest business contract. "I'm Elena," I said. It pointed to itself and made those musical sounds again. This time, though, I listened more carefully and caught something that sounded almost like whim. "Whim?" I repeated. Its face lit up and it nodded excitedly, its wings chiming with pleasure. "Whim it is, then. Nice to meet you, Whim." It let go of my finger and then, to my amazement, gave me a tiny bow. Its wings sparkled in the flashlight beam and its skin had settled into a warm, contented blue-green color. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I had no idea what Whim was, where it came from, or why it had appeared in my attic. All I knew was that for the first time since moving to Millbrook, I didn't feel completely alone. As I carefully scooped Whim up, it weighed almost nothing and felt warm and soft like holding a living flower. I caught sight of something glinting on the floor where it had been sitting. My grandmother's ring. The one I'd been wearing yesterday and thought I'd lost. "Did you take this?" I asked, holding it up. Whim's skin flushed pink again, and it made a sound that was clearly apologetic. Then it pointed to the ring and then to me, as if to say it had only borrowed it. "It's okay," I said, slipping the ring back onto my finger. "But maybe ask next time?" Whim nodded earnestly, and I couldn't help but smile. I had a feeling that getting it to actually ask permission was going to be the least of my challenges. But as I carried my new friend down to my room, I realized I was actually looking forward to finding out what those challenges might be. Having a magical roommate, it turned out, was nothing like I'd imagined. For starters, Whim had absolutely no concept of personal space or belongings. I woke up the next morning to find it curled up in my jewelry box, somehow having gotten inside despite the box being closed when I went to bed. Half of my earrings were scattered across the nightstand, arranged in what looked like tiny crop circles. "Whim," I groaned, rubbing my eyes. "What did you do?" Its skin immediately shifted to a guilty purple color, and it peeked out of the jewelry box with an expression that was part sheepish, part hopeful. In its tiny hands, it held my favorite pair of silver earrings, offering them to me like a peace treaty. "Did you reorganize my jewelry?" A hesitant nod. I looked closer at the arrangements on my nightstand. What I'd first taken for random scattering was actually quite organized. Earrings sorted by size and color, necklaces untangled and laid out in neat spirals. It had even polished everything. My jewelry had never looked better. "Oh," I said, feeling bad for my accusatory tone. "You were helping." Whim's skin brightened to a pleased yellow-green, and it nodded enthusiastically. "Thank you, but next time maybe wait until I'm awake to help with my things." It tilted its head, considering this, then made a sound that I was learning meant maybe, or I'll try. That should have been my first warning about what the rest of the day would bring. By the time I got home from school, Whim had helped with half of my room. My books were now arranged by color instead of alphabetically, creating a rainbow effect that was actually quite pretty, but made it impossible to find anything. My clothes had been refolded into origami-like shapes that looked artistic, but were completely impractical. And somehow, Whim had managed to get into my computer and reorganize my music library by what I could only guess was the emotional tone of each song. "Whim," I called out as I dropped my backpack. "Where are you?" A guilty jingling came from my closet. I opened the door to find Whim sitting in a nest made from my scarves, surrounded by every single one of my shoes. Each shoe had been polished to a mirror shine and stuffed with tissue paper shaped into perfect little flowers. Its skin was currently cycling through colors like a nervous rainbow, pink to blue to silver to green and back again. "Are you stressed?" I asked. It nodded vigorously and made a series of sounds that were clearly distressed. Then it pointed to the shoes, to itself, and then to me, its expression anxious. I sat down cross-legged in front of the closet. "You were trying to help again, weren't you?" Another nod, this one smaller and sadder. "Whim, the shoes look amazing, and so do my books, and my jewelry, and everything else you touched. You're incredibly good at making things beautiful." Its skin shifted to a cautious yellow. "But maybe we can work together on the organizing? I can show you how I like things arranged, and you can help me make them pretty. Would that work?" The anxious color cycling slowed, settling into a warm golden hue. Whim nodded, and then, in a gesture that made my heart squeeze, it held out one of my shoes to me like an offering. "Thank you," I said solemnly, accepting the shoe. "This is the shiniest my sneakers have ever been." Whim beamed, literally, its skin glowing with satisfaction. The rest of the evening was spent teaching Whim my organizational system. It was a surprisingly quick learner, watching intently as I explained where things went and why. When I demonstrated how to fold a t-shirt, it immediately copied my movements with its tiny hands, creating a perfect miniature version of my technique. "You're really good at copying things," I observed. Whim nodded proudly and then, to my amazement, began mimicking my movements exactly. When I raised my hand, it raised its hand. When I tilted my head, it tilted its head. When I smiled, it smiled back with an expression that was an almost perfect mirror of my own. "That's incredible," I breathed. "Is that how you learn? By copying?" It nodded and then pointed to me, making a questioning sound. "You want to copy me?" An enthusiastic nod. For the next hour, we played what was essentially the most adorable game of Simon Says ever invented. Whim copied every gesture I made, every expression, even the way I walked around the room. Its wings chimed softly with each movement, and its skin shifted through happy colors, mostly warm golds and soft greens. But the most amazing part was when it started copying sounds. At first, it was just humming along when I hummed. Then it began repeating simple words, its voice tiny but surprisingly clear. "Hello," I said slowly. "Hello," Whim repeated, its voice like wind chimes trying to speak. "My name is Elena." "Alina," it managed, and its skin glowed with pride. "What's your name?" It made those musical sounds again, but this time it followed them with a careful Whimzel. "Whimzel?" I repeated. "Is that your real name?" It nodded excitedly. "Whimzel," it said again, more confidently this time. "Whimzel," I said, testing how it felt. "I like it. It suits you." Whimzel practically glowed with happiness. As the evening wore on, I found myself talking to Whimzel about everything: school, my parents, how lonely I'd been feeling since the move. It listened intently, its colors shifting to match the emotions in my voice. When I talked about missing my friends in Phoenix, its skin turned a sympathetic blue. When I mentioned how tense things were between my parents, it turned a worried gray. But when I told it how glad I was that it had appeared in my attic, how much less alone I felt now, it glowed so brightly that I had to squint. "You're the best roommate I've ever had," I said, and I meant it. Whimzel chirped happily and then did something unexpected. It flew up to my shoulder and nestled against my neck like a tiny, warm, glowing hug. For the first time in months, falling asleep was easy. Whimzel curled up on my pillow next to my head, its soft glow dimming to a gentle nightlight. its wings making the faintest chiming sounds like a lullaby. I drifted off thinking that maybe, just maybe, this move to Millbrook wasn't going to be so bad after all. Hiding a magical creature from the world turned out to be both easier and harder than I'd expected. The easy part was that Whimzel seemed to understand the need for secrecy instinctively. Whenever I had to leave for school, it would curl up in the shoebox I'd lined with soft fabric and wait patiently for me to return. It never made noise when my parents were around, and it had an uncanny ability to sense when someone was coming upstairs. The hard part was that Whimzel was naturally curious about everything, especially people. You have to stay hidden when Mom and Dad are here, I explained for the third time that week, as Whimzel perched on my desk, watching my mother through the crack in my bedroom door. Whimzel's skin shifted to a disappointed purple, but it nodded reluctantly. Then it pointed to my mother and made a questioning sound. "That's my mom," I said. She's having a hard time right now. The move has been stressful for everyone." I could hear Mom on the phone downstairs, her voice tight with frustration as she talked to someone about Dad's work situation. The conversation had the same tone as all their recent fights, worried, angry, barely controlled. Whimzel tilted its head, listening, and its colors shifted to concerned gray. Then it looked at me with those enormous eyes and made a soft, comforting sound. "Thanks," I said, stroking its tiny head with one finger. "I know you want to help, but humans get scared of things they don't understand, and my parents have enough to worry about right now." Whimzel nodded solemnly, though I could see it was still curious about the humans who shared its new home. At school, keeping the secret was a different kind of challenge. I found myself distracted during classes, thinking about Whimzel alone in my room. Was it bored? Lonely? Getting into trouble with my belongings? "Miss Scott?" I jerked back to attention to find my chemistry teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, staring at me expectantly. "Sorry," I mumbled. "Could you repeat the question?" A few students snickered, and I felt my face burn with embarrassment. I'd never been the type to zone out in class before, but lately it seemed like I couldn't focus on anything except my tiny secret. At lunch, I sat alone as usual, picking at my sandwich and wondering what Whimzel was doing. I'd started bringing extra snacks home. It had developed a particular fondness for anything sweet, and watching it nibble on cookie crumbs was possibly the cutest thing I'd ever seen. "Hey, you're the new girl, right?" I looked up to find a boy about my age standing next to my table. He had curly red hair and freckles, and he was holding a lunch tray like he wasn't sure what to do with it. "Yeah," I said cautiously. "Elena?" "I'm Marcus. Mind if I sit? The cafeteria is pretty crowded today." I glanced around. The cafeteria was maybe half full, but he seemed nice enough, so I nodded to the empty seat across from me. "Thanks," he said, settling in with his tray. "So, how are you liking Millbrook so far? It's probably pretty different from wherever you came from." "Phoenix," I said. "And yeah, it's an adjustment." Marcus grinned. "That's one way to put it. Millbrook's not exactly known for its excitement, though there have been some weird things happening lately." My heart skipped. "Weird how?" "Oh, strange lights in the sky, weird sounds at night. Mrs. Chen, who lives on Maple Street, swears she saw something glowing in her garden last week. Probably just teenagers with flashlights, but people are getting all worked up about it." I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. "Sounds like small-town gossip to me." "Yeah, probably," Marcus agreed. "Still kind of fun, though. Beats talking about the weather or the high school football team." We chatted for the rest of lunch, and I found myself actually enjoying the conversation. Marcus was funny and easy to talk to, and he didn't seem to care that I was new or different. When the bell rang, I realized I was almost disappointed. "See you tomorrow?" he asked as we cleared our trays. "Sure," I said, and meant it. The walk home felt lighter somehow. Maybe I could make friends here after all. Maybe. I stopped dead in my driveway. Through my bedroom window, I could see a soft, pulsing glow. Whimzel was supposed to be hiding during the day. That glow was visible from the street. I ran inside and up the stairs, my heart pounding. "Whimzel?" I called softly as I pushed open my bedroom door. The sight that greeted me made me gasp. My entire room was glowing. Not just Whimzel, everything. My books, my clothes, my furniture, even my walls had a soft, golden luminescence. It was beautiful and magical and completely impossible to hide. Whimzel was hovering in the center of the room, its wings beating rapidly, its skin cycling through colors so quickly it looked like a tiny disco ball. When it saw me, it chirped excitedly and flew over, landing on my shoulder. "What did you do?" I whispered. It pointed around the room and made a series of musical sounds that sounded distinctly proud. "You made everything glow?" A nod. "But people can see it from outside." Whimzel's expression immediately shifted to alarm, and its skin turned a panicked purple. It looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time, then made a sound that was clearly distressed. "It's okay," I said quickly, seeing how upset it was getting. "Can you make it stop?" Whimzel flew around the room, touching various glowing objects. Gradually, the light began to fade until everything was back to normal. By the time it finished, it looked exhausted, its usual bright colors dimmed to pale pastels. I scooped it up gently. "Why did you do it?" It pointed to itself, then to me, then made a gesture I didn't understand. "You were practicing something?" A nod. "Practicing what?" Whimzel flew to my desk and picked up a pencil that was almost as big as it was. Then, to my amazement, it began to draw. The lines it made were shaky but recognizable, a rough sketch of a person. Me, I realized. Then it drew itself next to the figure of me, but in the drawing, Whimzel was the same size as the person. "You were practicing changing size?" I guessed. Whimzel shook its head and pointed to the drawing again. This time, I noticed that the figure of me in the drawing had wings. My breath caught. "You were trying to give me wings?" An enthusiastic nod. "So I could fly with you?" Another nod, this one accompanied by colors that cycled through hopeful golds and excited greens. I stared at this tiny, magical creature who wanted to share its abilities with me, who had tried to transform my entire room into something as special as itself, and felt my heart swell with affection. "That's the sweetest thing anyone's ever tried to do for me," I said softly. "But I don't think human bodies work that way." Whimzel's colors dimmed with disappointment, but it nodded understandingly. "Maybe you can teach me other things, though," I suggested. "Things that won't make the house glow and attract attention?" Its colors brightened immediately. That evening, after my parents had gone to bed, Whimzel began teaching me its games. It started with simple mimicry, copying my expressions and movements until we were perfectly synchronized. Then it moved on to color communication, showing me how different colors meant different emotions or concepts. The most amazing lesson came when Whimzel demonstrated how it could camouflage itself. One moment it was glowing gold on my pillow, and the next it had shifted to perfectly match the fabric pattern, becoming nearly invisible. "That's incredible," I breathed. "Can you do that anywhere?" Whimzel nodded and proceeded to demonstrate, moving around my room and blending seamlessly with different surfaces. It could mimic not just colors but textures, looking like wood grain when it perched on my desk, like denim when it sat on my jeans. "You're like a tiny chameleon," I said, "but magical." Whimzel preened at the compliment, its colors shifting to pleased pinks and golds. As I got ready for bed, I found myself thinking about Marcus's comment about strange lights in the neighborhood. Had other people seen Whimzel? Were there more of whatever it was? "Whimzel," I said as it settled into its usual spot on my pillow. "Are there others like you?" Its expression grew sad, and its colors shifted to lonely blues and grays. It shook its head slowly. "You're the only one?" A hesitant nod. "Do you know where you came from?" Whimzel was quiet for a long moment, its colors cycling through what I was learning to recognize as its thinking pattern, soft purples and silvers. Finally, it pointed upward. "From the sky?" Another nod. "Like, from space or from somewhere else?" It made a sound that I interpreted as somewhere else, and pointed upward again, but with a gesture that seemed to indicate not just up but somehow beyond. "Are you lost?" Whimzel's colors went very still, settling into a deep blue that I'd never seen before. Then it looked at me with those enormous eyes and shook its head slowly. "You're not lost?" Another head shake. Then it pointed to me, to itself, and made a sound that I could have sworn meant home. I felt something warm and bright unfold in my chest. "You think this is home now? With me?" Whimzel nodded emphatically, its colors brightening to the happiest golds I'd seen yet. It flew up and nuzzled against my cheek, its wings chiming softly. "I'm glad," I whispered. "I think this is home for me too now." As I drifted off to sleep, I felt Whimzel settle against my pillow, its gentle glow dimming to almost nothing. For the first time since moving to Millbrook, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. I just hoped we could keep our secret long enough for me to figure out what that belonging really meant. The first sign of trouble came during third period biology. I was trying to focus on Mrs. Patterson's lecture about cellular respiration, but my attention kept drifting to thoughts of Whimzel. I'd left it that morning curled up in a shoebox filled with soft fabric scraps, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Call it intuition or just new roommate anxiety, but I had a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. When my phone buzzed with a text, I nearly jumped out of my seat. Unknown number, is this Elena Scott? I need to talk to you about what you're hiding. Meet me after school. Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne. My blood ran cold. I read the message 3 times, my heart pounding harder with each pass. Who was Dr. Hawthorne? How did she get my number? And what did she know about Whimzel? I managed to make it through the rest of the day in a daze, barely hearing any of my classes. Marcus tried to talk to me at lunch, but I was too distracted to carry on a conversation. You okay? He asked, looking concerned. You seem, I don't know, worried about something. I'm fine, I lied. Just tired. But I wasn't fine. I was terrified. The moment the final bell rang, I practically ran to the parking lot, scanning the faces around me for anyone who looked like they might be a doctor. I didn't have to search long. A woman in her 40s stood next to a black sedan, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a tailored gray suit and carried a briefcase, but it was her eyes that caught my attention. Sharp, intelligent, and focused directly on me. Elena Scott? She called out as I approached. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, she said, extending a hand. I'm a xenobiologist with the Pacific Northwest Research Institute. I study unusual life forms. My mouth went dry. I don't know what you're talking about. Doctor? Hawthorne smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. I think you do. I've been tracking some very interesting energy signatures in this area for the past few weeks. They all seem to center around your house. Energy signatures? Electromagnetic anomalies. Light patterns that don't match any known natural phenomena. And most recently, reports from your neighbors about strange glowing in your bedroom window. I felt like I was going to throw up. I don't know anything about that. Elena, Dr. Hawthorne said, her voice gentler now. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm a scientist. If you've encountered something extraordinary, I can help you understand what it is. There's nothing to understand, I said, backing away. You've got the wrong person. Dr. Hawthorne sighed and opened her briefcase. She pulled out a tablet and showed me the screen. It displayed what looked like a heat map of my neighborhood, with one house glowing much brighter than the others, my house. These readings are from last night, she said. Between 9 and 11 p.m., your bedroom emitted energy levels that shouldn't be possible from any known technology. My stomach dropped. That was exactly when Whimzel had been practicing its mimicry games, making my room glow softly as it changed colors. Look, Dr. Hawthorne continued, I know this is overwhelming, but whatever you're dealing with, you don't have to face it alone. My institute has resources, facilities where unusual specimens can be studied safely. Specimens? The word came out sharper than I intended. Poor choice of words, she said quickly. I meant entities, life forms. Whatever you've found, I can help you understand it properly. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. I have to go home. Elena, wait. But I was already walking away, my heart hammering in my chest. Behind me, I heard Dr. Hawthorne call out, think about what I said. You have my number now. The walk home felt endless. Every car that passed made me nervous. Every person on the street seemed to be watching me. By the time I reached my house, I was practically jogging. I burst through the front door and took the stairs 2 at a time. Whimzel, I called softly as I opened my bedroom door. Silence. Whimzel, where are you? A faint jingling came from my closet. I opened the door to find Whimzel huddled in the corner, its colors a muted, frightened gray. What's wrong? I asked, scooping it up gently. It pointed toward the window and made a series of distressed sounds. Then it flew to the window and pressed itself against the glass, its colors shifting to agitated purples and reds. I looked outside and saw what had spooked it. Dr. Hawthorne's black sedan was parked across the street. She followed me home, I whispered. Whimzel's colors darkened to near black, and it made a sound I'd never heard before, low and almost growling, despite its tiny size. She says she wants to help, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. She's a scientist who studies things like you. Whimzel flew back to me and grabbed onto my finger with both hands, shaking its head vigorously. Its colors were cycling through every shade of no I'd learned to recognize. You don't trust her? An emphatic headshake. Why not? Whimzel paused, then began drawing on my palm with one tiny finger. The sensation tickled, but I held still until it finished. When I looked at my palm, I could see the faint outline of what looked like a cage. My blood chilled. You think she wants to cage you? Whimzel nodded sadly, its colors settling into resigned blues. That's not going to happen, I said firmly. I won't let anyone take you away. But even as I said it, I wondered how I could possibly keep that promise. Dr. Hawthorne clearly had resources I didn't. She had scientific equipment that could track Whimzel's energy, a government institute behind her, and probably legal authority I couldn't even imagine. What did I have? Nothing but determination and a fierce protectiveness over my tiny friend. The next few days passed in tense quiet. Dr. Hawthorne's car appeared sporadically across the street, never at the same time, but often enough to keep me on edge. I started closing my curtains as soon as I got home from school, and I warned Whimzel to keep its colors as dim as possible. But Whimzel was getting restless. It was used to playing games, practicing its abilities, glowing freely in the safety of my room. Being forced to suppress its natural behaviors was clearly making it unhappy. I know this is hard, I told it one evening as it sat listlessly on my pillow, its colors a muted brown that I'd learned meant depression. But it's just until I figure out how to handle Dr. Hawthorne. Whimzel looked at me with those enormous eyes and made a soft, questioning sound. I don't know how, I admitted, but I'll think of something. The something, unfortunately, came in the form of Whimzel's growing frustration with staying hidden. It happened on a Friday afternoon. I'd had a particularly stressful day at school, a pop quiz in math that I was sure I'd failed, and Marcus asking me why I'd been so distant lately. I came home feeling overwhelmed and exhausted. Hey, Whimzel, I called as I dropped my backpack. How was your day? Usually Whimzel would fly to greet me, its colors bright with happiness. This time, there was no response. I found it sitting on my windowsill, staring outside with an expression that looked almost human in its longing. Its colors were the saddest blues I'd ever seen. What's wrong? I asked, sitting down next to it. It pointed outside, then to itself, then made a gesture that clearly meant, fly. You want to go outside? A nod so enthusiastic it nearly fell over. Whimzel, you know we can't. It's not safe. Its colors shifted to frustrated reds. It flew in a circle around my room, its wings chiming agitatedly, then landed back on the windowsill and pressed itself against the glass. I know you're tired of being cooped up, I said, but Dr. Hawthorne is watching the house, if she sees you. Whimzel turned to look at me, and for the first time since I'd known it, its expression was almost defiant. It made a series of sounds that were clearly an argument, its colors cycling through every shade of determination it could manage. No, I said firmly. I'm not risking you getting captured just because you're bored. That was apparently the wrong thing to say. Whimzel's colors flashed to bright, angry red, and it made a sound that was unmistakably insulted. Then, before I could stop it, it darted toward the window. Whimzel, no. But it was too late. Whimzel had found a gap where the window wasn't quite closed and squeezed through it. I watched in horror as it flew outside, a tiny glowing figure against the gray Oregon sky. I pressed my face against the window, trying to see where it had gone. For a moment, I couldn't spot it at all. Then I saw a flash of gold near the big oak tree in our front yard. Whimzel was putting on a show. It looped and spiraled around the tree, its colors shifting through every beautiful shade it could produce. It was like watching a tiny aurora dance through the air, absolutely magnificent and completely impossible to miss. Come back, I whispered, knowing it couldn't hear me. But even as I watched, transfixed by the beauty of Whimzel's flight, I saw Dr. Hawthorne's sedan pull up across the street. My heart stopped. The car door opened, and Dr. Hawthorne stepped out. her eyes immediately locking onto the glowing figure in our tree. She pulled out what looked like a camera or scanner and began pointing it at Whimzel. "No, no," I muttered, throwing open my bedroom door and racing downstairs. By the time I made it outside, Whimzel had apparently noticed Dr. Hawthorne too. Its playful loops had turned into panicked zigzags, and its colors had shifted to terrified whites and grays. "Whimzel," I called, holding out my hands. "Come here." It tried to fly toward me, but it was clearly disoriented by fear. Instead of landing in my hands, it crashed into the side of our house and tumbled to the ground. I ran toward where it had fallen, but Dr. Hawthorne was faster. She crossed the street quickly, her scanner still in hand. "Don't touch it," I shouted. "It's hurt," Dr. Hawthorne said, approaching the tiny figure huddled against our foundation. "I can help." "Stay away from it." But Dr. Hawthorne was already kneeling next to Whimzel, her scanner beeping rapidly. "Fascinating," she murmured. "The energy readings are off the charts, and the cellular structure appears to be—" I said, "Stay away." I grabbed Whimzel before Dr. Hawthorne could touch it, cradling the tiny creature against my chest. It was trembling, its colors cycling through panicked patterns. "It's okay," I whispered. "I've got you." Dr. Hawthorne stood up slowly, her eyes never leaving Whimzel. "Alina, that creature needs medical attention, and it needs proper study. Do you have any idea what you're dealing with?" "It's not a creature," I said fiercely. "It's my friend." "It's an entirely unknown species," Dr. Hawthorne replied. "Possibly not even from this planet. It could be dangerous. The only dangerous thing here is you trying to take it away." Dr. Hawthorne's expression softened slightly. "I understand you feel protective, but this is bigger than just you and your friend. This could be one of the most important scientific discoveries in human history." "I don't care. Think about what's best for it," she continued. "It needs proper care, proper study. My institute has facilities." "Your institute has cages," I interrupted. "I know what happens to unusual things when scientists get their hands on them." "That's not." Dr. Hawthorne stopped herself. "Look, why don't we all go inside and discuss this calmly? I'm sure we can reach some kind of arrangement." Every instinct I had was screaming at me not to let this woman into my house, but Whimzel was still trembling in my arms, and I could see a few neighbors starting to peer out of their windows. The last thing I needed was more attention. "5 minutes," I said reluctantly, "and you don't touch it." As we walked toward my front door, I felt Whimzel press itself closer against my chest, its tiny heartbeat rapid against my palm. I had no idea what Dr. Hawthorne really wanted or what authority she had to take Whimzel away. All I knew was that I wasn't going to let it happen. Not without a fight. The conversation in my living room was a disaster from the start. Dr. Hawthorne sat on the edge of our couch, her tablet balanced on her knees, while I remained standing near the door with Whimzel clutched protectively in my hands. My tiny friend had gone completely still, its colors locked in frightened grays and whites. "I want you to understand," Dr. Hawthorne began, "that I'm not the villain here. My institute studies extraordinary phenomena to better understand our world. Your friend represents a breakthrough that could change everything we know about biology, about life itself." "It's not a specimen," I said for what felt like the 100th time. "Of course not. It's clearly intelligent, possibly more so than we are. That's what makes it so important to study properly." She leaned forward. "Elena, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've never seen anything like the energy signatures your friend produces. The implications for science, for medicine, for our understanding of life in the universe." "I don't care about implications," I interrupted. "I care about Whimzel." "Whimzel?" Dr. Hawthorne's eyebrows rose. "It has a name?" I immediately regretted saying it. Something about her expression had changed, become more intense. "Can it communicate?" she continued. "Does it understand language?" I didn't answer, but Whimzel shifted in my hands, and I felt its tiny claws grip my fingers tighter. "Remarkable," Dr. Hawthorne murmured, making notes on her tablet. "A previously unknown intelligent species, capable of what appears to be controlled bioluminescence and chromatic communication. This changes everything." "You're talking about it like it's not here," I said angrily. "You're right, I apologize." Dr. Hawthorne looked directly at Whimzel. "Hello there. I'm Dr. Hawthorne. I'd very much like to learn about you." Whimzel's response was to press itself further into my hands and make a sound that was clearly distressed. "It's afraid of you," I said. "Understandably. I'm a stranger, but with time and proper care." I started backing toward the door. "We're done here. I want you to leave." Dr. Hawthorne sighed. "Elena, I was hoping we could work together on this, but I'm afraid I can't simply walk away. What you have here, it's too important." Something in her tone made my blood run cold. "What do you mean?" She stood up slowly, her expression becoming more official. "I mean that I'm prepared to involve local authorities if necessary. Child services, for instance. A 16-year-old girl keeping an unknown, potentially dangerous organism isn't something that can be ignored." "You're threatening me?" "I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone. But if you force my hand..." She let the implication hang in the air. I felt Whimzel trembling against my palms, and something fierce and protective rose up in my chest. "Get out. Elena, get out." Dr. Hawthorne gathered her things, her expression disappointed but not surprised. "I'll give you tonight to think about this, but tomorrow I'll be back with the proper authorities. For everyone's sake, I hope you'll reconsider." After she left, I stood in our living room, shaking with anger and fear. Through the window, I could see her car still parked across the street. "She's not going to give up," I whispered to Whimzel. Its colors had settled into a deep, sad blue that I'd never seen before. It looked up at me with those enormous eyes and made a soft sound that somehow conveyed both gratitude and resignation. "What do we do?" I asked. Whimzel was quiet for a long moment. Then it flew to the coffee table and began tracing shapes with one tiny finger. I watched as it drew a rough map of our house, then added what looked like a path leading away from it. "You want to leave?" I asked, my heart clenching. It nodded slowly, its colors cycling through shades of sadness. "But where would you go?" Whimzel pointed upward, then made a gesture that seemed to indicate far away. "Back to wherever you came from?" A hesitant nod. "Do you even know how to get there?" Whimzel's colors dimmed further. It shook its head. I sank down onto the couch, feeling overwhelmed. "There has to be another way. We could hide, or..." The sound of the front door opening cut me off. Mom's voice called out, "Elena, whose car is that across the street?" Panic shot through me. I quickly scooped up Whimzel, who immediately went still and dimmed its colors to almost nothing. "Just someone who was lost," I called back, trying to sound casual. "They were asking for directions." Mom appeared in the doorway, looking tired and stressed as usual. "Are you okay? You look pale." "I'm fine. Just homework stress." She studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "Well, dinner will be ready in an hour. Your father should be home by then." After she disappeared into the kitchen, I carried Whimzel upstairs to my room and closed the door. "We need a plan," I said, setting it gently on my pillow. But Whimzel wasn't listening. It was staring at something on my nightstand, its colors shifting to alarmed oranges and reds. I followed its gaze and felt my stomach drop. My phone was buzzing with notifications. Text after text was coming in from an unknown number. Energy spike detected at 7:32. Subject confirmed in visual range. Recommend immediate containment. Authorization pending. Stand by for extraction team. "Oh no," I whispered. "She's been monitoring us this whole time." Whimzel made a sound that was pure distress and flew in agitated circles around my room. Its colors were cycling so rapidly I could barely track them. Outside, I heard the sound of multiple car doors slamming. I ran to the window and felt my heart stop. 3 black SUVs had joined Dr. Hawthorne's sedan. People in official-looking uniforms were getting out, carrying equipment I didn't recognize. "Elena?" Mom's voice from downstairs, sounding confused. "There are some people here who want to speak with you." I looked at Whimzel, who had gone completely still on my pillow, its colors locked in terrified white. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry I let this happen." Heavy footsteps on the stairs, multiple people coming up. "The window," I said suddenly. "Can you fly out the window?" Whimzel shook its head and pointed to the glass. I looked and saw that one of the uniformed people was positioned outside with some kind of net device. A knock on my door. "Elena Scott? This is Agent Martinez with the Department of Unusual Phenomena. We need to speak with you." Department of Unusual Phenomena? That sounded both official and terrifying. "Just a minute," I called out, my mind racing. Whimzel flew to me and pressed something into my hand. I looked down and saw my grandmother's ring, the same one it had borrowed that first day in the attic. What? But Whimzel was already flying toward the heating vent near my closet. It paused at the opening and looked back at me, its colors showing every shade of goodbye it could manage. No, I whispered. Don't leave me. Don't leave me. It made a soft, musical sound that somehow conveyed both love and necessity. Then it squeezed through the vent opening and disappeared. The door to my room opened without my permission. Agent Martinez entered, followed by Dr. Hawthorne and two other people in black uniforms carrying strange scanning equipment. Where is it? Agent Martinez asked without preamble. Where's what? I said, though my voice was shaking. The agents began scanning my room with their equipment. The devices beeped and whirred, but gradually the sounds became less frequent. Energy levels are residual only, one of the agents reported. Whatever was here is gone. Check the vents, Dr. Hawthorne said. It's small enough to fit through the ductwork. While they searched, I clutched my grandmother's ring and tried not to cry. Somewhere in the walls of my house, Whimzel was crawling through dark, narrow spaces, alone and frightened. And it was all my fault. We'll set up monitoring equipment, Agent Martinez was saying. If it returns, we'll know immediately. It won't return, I said quietly. They all looked at me. It's gone, I continued, feeling hollow inside. You scared it away? Are you happy now? Dr. Hawthorne looked genuinely remorseful. Elena, I never wanted it to come to this. If you had just cooperated, if I had just handed over my friend to be locked up and experimented on. I stood up, anger giving me strength. Would you have done that if someone came for your best friend? She didn't answer. The agents finished their search and packed up their equipment. We'll maintain surveillance, Agent Martinez told me. If you see it again, you're to contact us immediately. Do you understand? I nodded, not trusting my voice. After they left, I sat on my bed and stared at the heating vent where Whimzel had disappeared. My room felt enormous and empty without its warm glow, without its cheerful chiming sounds. I looked at my grandmother's ring, wondering why Whimzel had given it to me. It was just a simple silver band with a small blue stone, nothing special except for the memories attached to it. But as I turned it in the light, I noticed something I'd never seen before. Tiny engravings around the band, so small they were almost invisible. They looked almost like the symbols Whimzel drew when it was trying to communicate something important. My heart started beating faster. Was this some kind of message? A clue about where it had gone? Outside my window, Dr. Hawthorne's car started up and drove away. The other vehicles followed, leaving my street quiet and normal-looking once again. But nothing felt normal. My magical friend was gone, disappeared into the maze of heating ducts and crawl spaces that connected the houses in our neighborhood. And I had no idea if I would ever see it again. I held the ring up to the light again, studying the tiny symbols. If they were a message, I was going to figure out what it meant, because I wasn't giving up on Whimzel. Not yet. I spent 3 sleepless nights studying my grandmother's ring under a magnifying glass I'd borrowed from Dad's toolkit. The tiny symbols etched around the band were definitely the same style as Whimzel's drawings, but I couldn't make sense of what they meant. On the 4th morning, exhausted and frustrated, I was walking to school when I heard it. The faintest chiming sound coming from a storm drain near the corner of Maple and Pine. I knelt down and peered through the metal grating. Whimzel? A soft glow appeared in the darkness below, followed by a sound that was unmistakably relieved recognition. Oh, thank God, I whispered. Are you okay? The glow moved closer, and I could see Whimzel pressed against the inside of the grating. It looked terrible. Its colors were dim and muddy, and its wings seemed to be missing some of their shimmer. You look hurt, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Whimzel nodded sadly and pointed deeper into the storm drain. It made a series of sounds that I interpreted as an explanation. But the meaning was lost in the echoes. I can't understand you down there. Can you come up? Whimzel shook its head and pointed toward the street. Even from down in the drain, it had spotted one of the surveillance vans that had been patrolling our neighborhood. They're still looking for you, I said. But I've been thinking about this, and I have an idea. Do you remember the symbols you drew for me? The ones about going home? An enthusiastic nod. I think you left me a map. I held up my grandmother's ring. angling it so Whimzel could see the tiny engravings. These symbols look like yours. Whimzel's glow brightened considerably, and it made excited chiming sounds. So this is directions to where you came from? A nod so vigorous it nearly fell over. But I still can't read them. Can you show me what they mean? Whimzel looked around the storm drain, then began scratching symbols in the dirt and debris at the bottom. Even upside down and through metal grating, I could see they matched some of the ones on the ring. The first symbol looked like a tree with many branches. Whimzel pointed up through the grating toward the big oak in our front yard. Start at the oak tree? A nod. The next symbol was harder to interpret, something that looked like a circle with lines radiating from it. Whimzel pointed toward the east and made a gesture that suggested movement. Go east when the sun rises? Another nod. The third symbol looked like waves or rolling hills. Whimzel made a walking motion with its tiny hands. Walk until I reach hills? Yes. The fourth symbol was the most complex. It looked like a doorway or arch, but with stars around it. For this one, Whimzel's colors shifted to something I'd never seen before. A deep, shimmering purple that seemed to contain actual pinpricks of light, like a tiny galaxy swirling across its skin. That's where you came from? I breathed. Some kind of portal? Whimzel nodded, but its colors also shifted to include worried oranges and reds. It's dangerous? A hesitant nod. But you need to get there? This time, the nod was decisive. I sat back on my heels, my mind racing. When? Whimzel pointed to the sky, then made a gesture I interpreted as tonight. The portal only opens at night? A nod. And it's in the hills east of here? Another nod. I checked my watch. It was almost time for first period, but school seemed impossibly unimportant right now. I'll come with you, I said. Whimzel's colors immediately shifted to alarmed reds, and it shook its head frantically. Yes, I will. I'm not letting you go alone, especially not when you're hurt. More head shaking and distressed sounds. Whimzel, I'm not arguing about this. You're my friend, and friends don't abandon each other. I paused. Besides, how are you going to get there? You can barely fly right now. Whimzel looked down at its wings, which were indeed looking ragged and dim. Its colors shifted to reluctant agreement. Tonight, I said. After my parents go to bed, meet me by the oak tree. Whimzel nodded, then made a sound that was clearly gratitude mixed with worry. It'll be okay, I said, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. I'll figure something out. The rest of the day passed in a blur of classes I couldn't concentrate on and conversations I barely heard. Marcus tried to talk to me at lunch again, but I was too focused on planning to be good company. At dinner, my parents seemed to notice my distraction. Everything okay, sweetheart? Mom asked. You've been quiet lately. Just school stuff, I said. I'm thinking about joining some clubs. You know, getting more involved. Dad smiled. That's great, Alina. I know the move has been hard, but I'm glad you're starting to settle in. If only he knew that settling in involved planning a midnight rescue mission for a magical creature being hunted by government agents. That night, I waited until I heard my parents' bedroom door close and their voices settle into the quiet rhythm of sleep. Then I got dressed in dark clothes, packed a small backpack with water and snacks, and crept downstairs. The house was different at night, full of shadows and unfamiliar sounds. Every creak of the floorboards made me wince, but I made it to the back door without incident. Outside, the October air was crisp and clear. The oak tree in our front yard looked massive and mysterious in the moonlight, its branches reaching toward the stars like the symbol on my ring. I didn't have to wait long. A faint glow appeared near the base of the tree, and Whimzel emerged from what looked like a small hole in the roots. Hey, I whispered, ready for an adventure? Whimzel flew up to my shoulder, its colors muted but determined. It pointed east toward the hills that were barely visible in the darkness. We started walking. The first part of the journey took us through residential neighborhoods that looked eerily quiet in the pre-dawn hours. Whimzel rode on my shoulder, its weight barely noticeable, but its presence comforting. Occasionally it would chirp softly to indicate a direction change, guiding us along paths I wouldn't have thought to take. As we moved away from the developed areas and into the more rural outskirts of Millbrook, the landscape began to change. Houses became farmhouses, then disappeared altogether. The road turned into a dirt path, and the path began to climb into the foothills. "How much further?" I whispered. Whimzel pointed ahead and made a sound that suggested not much longer, but its colors were getting dimmer with each passing minute. The journey was clearly taking a toll. "Do you need to rest?" It shook its head stubbornly, but I could feel it trembling with exhaustion. We climbed higher, following what seemed to be an old hiking trail. The trees grew thicker around us, and strange shadows danced in the moonlight. I was starting to wonder if we were lost when Whimzel suddenly perked up, its colors brightening slightly. Ahead of us, the trees opened into a small clearing. And in the center of that clearing was something that made my breath catch. It looked like a doorway made of starlight. The arch was about 8 feet tall and shimmered with the same deep purple color I'd seen in Whimzel's skin earlier. Stars seemed to wheel and dance within its frame, and the air around it hummed with a sound like distant music. "That's it," I breathed. "That's your way home." Whimzel flew off my shoulder and hovered in front of the portal, its colors shifting through what I recognized as happiness, relief, and deep sadness all at once. "You don't want to go," I said, understanding. It flew back to me and nuzzled against my cheek, its tiny body warm and trembling. "But you have to." A reluctant nod. "Will I ever see you again?" Whimzel was quiet for a long moment. Then it pointed to my ring, to itself, and made a gesture that seemed to mean, always connected. Before I could ask what that meant, we heard the sound of vehicles approaching from the trail below. Headlights began to flicker through the trees. "They found us," I said, my heart sinking. Whimzel's colors flashed panicked white. The portal behind us began to pulse more rapidly, as if it sensed the approaching danger. "Go," I said urgently. "Now, before they get here." But Whimzel was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Its colors shifted to determined golds and greens, and it made a sound that was clearly a decision being made. Then, before I could stop it, Whimzel pressed its tiny hands against my grandmother's ring. The world exploded in light. When my vision cleared, I was no longer standing in the clearing. I was floating, suspended in what looked like a tunnel of stars. Whimzel was beside me, but it looked different. Larger, more radiant, its wings spread wide and glowing like captured galaxies. Around us, the tunnel pulsed with colors I'd never seen before, and I could hear music that seemed to come from the stars themselves. "Where are we?" I asked, amazed to find that I could speak normally despite floating in what was obviously not normal space. Whimzel made a sound that I somehow understood perfectly. "Between worlds. Safe passage." We were flying through the portal together. Behind us, I could hear shouting voices getting fainter and fainter. Dr. Hawthorne and her agents had arrived at the clearing, but they were too late. The tunnel began to brighten ahead of us, and I could see what looked like an opening, surrounded by swirling clouds of every color imaginable. "Is that your home?" I asked. Whimzel nodded, its expression both excited and sad. As we approached the opening, I began to see what lay beyond. It was a place of impossible beauty, floating islands connected by bridges of light, waterfalls that flowed upward into rainbow mists, creatures like Whimzel dancing through the air in swirling patterns that looked like living art. "It's beautiful," I whispered. Whimzel's colors shifted to proud golds, but then they dimmed again as we reached the edge of the opening. "You have to stay here," I said, understanding. "And I have to go back." A sad nod. "But we'll always be connected," I continued, touching my ring. "You said so." Whimzel flew closer and pressed its tiny hands against the stone in my ring once more. This time, the light was gentler, warmer. When it faded, the blue stones seemed to glow with an inner light that matched Whimzel's colors. "A piece of home," Whimzel said, and this time I heard the words clearly, as if we were speaking the same language. "So you remember." "I could never forget you," I said, tears blurring my vision. Whimzel nuzzled against my cheek one last time, then began to glow brighter and brighter. The light surrounded me, warm and comforting, and I felt myself being gently pushed back toward the tunnel. As I drifted away from the opening, I could see Whimzel surrounded by others of its kind, welcomed home by a swirling crowd of colorful, chiming creatures. It looked back once and waved, its colors shifting through every shade of love and gratitude it could manage. Then the opening closed, and I was alone in the star tunnel, floating gently back toward my own world. I woke up in my own bed, sunlight streaming through my windows, and the sound of my parents making breakfast drifting up from the kitchen. For a moment, I wondered if the entire night had been a dream. Then I looked at my hand and saw my grandmother's ring glowing softly with that familiar blue-green light. I sat up carefully, my body aching like I'd walked for miles. Because I had walked for miles, through forests and up hills to a clearing where starlight doorways opened between worlds. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a panicked moment, I thought it might be Dr. Hawthorne, but the name on the screen was Marcus. "Hey, you weren't in school yesterday. Everything okay?" I stared at the message, trying to piece together what day it was. Had I really been gone for just one night? It felt like I'd been traveling through star tunnels for days. I texted back, "Just had some family stuff to deal with. I'll be there today." "Cool. Looking forward to hearing about your family stuff. You've been super mysterious lately." I couldn't help but smile. If only he knew. Downstairs, my parents were indeed making breakfast, and they greeted me with the same casual normalcy they always did. No one seemed to notice I'd been gone all night, which made me wonder if time worked differently when you traveled between worlds. "You look better today," Mom commented, setting a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me. "More? I don't know. Peaceful?" She was right. Despite everything that had happened, losing Whimzel, being chased by government agents, traveling to another dimension, I did feel peaceful. The hollow ache in my chest from the past few days was gone, replaced by something warm and bright. I said, and meant it. At school, I found myself actually paying attention in classes for the first time in weeks. The world seemed sharper somehow, more vivid. Colors were brighter, sounds were clearer, and I felt more present in my own life than I had since before the move. Marcus noticed the change immediately when he joined me at lunch. "Okay, spill," he said, sitting down with his tray. "You look like someone who just solved the mystery of the universe." "Maybe I did," I said, then laughed at his expression. "Sorry, I know I've been weird lately. I was dealing with some personal stuff, but it's resolved now." Good personal stuff or bad personal stuff? I considered the question. Saying goodbye to Whimzel had been heartbreaking, but seeing it return home safely, surrounded by its own kind, had been worth the pain. "Good," I said. "Definitely good. I'm glad." Marcus took a bite of his sandwich, then looked at me curiously. "So, want to hear the latest weird Millbrook gossip?" "Sure. Remember how I told you about those strange lights people had been seeing?" "Well, apparently there was some kind of big to-do up in the hills 2 nights ago. Government types with black SUVs and everything. Mrs. Chen's cousin works for the Forest Service, and she said they had the whole area cordoned off." My stomach tightened. Did they find anything? Nah. According to the rumors, whatever they were looking for had already disappeared. But get this. Afterwards, people started reporting that their electronics were working better. Like, dramatically better. TV reception is clearer, cell phone batteries are lasting longer, even old radios are picking up stations they never could before. I touched my ring unconsciously. Its soft glow was hidden by my fingers, but I could feel its warmth. "That's weird," I said. "Right? It's like whatever was up there left some kind of positive energy behind." Marcus grinned. "I'm choosing to believe it was friendly aliens who wanted to give us better Wi-Fi as a goodbye present." "That's a nice theory," I said, smiling despite myself. "Oh, and the really weird part? All the government people left town yesterday morning. Just packed up and drove away. It's like they decided there was nothing here worth investigating after all." Relief flooded through me. Dr. Hawthorne and her team were gone. Whatever they'd found, or hadn't found, in that clearing had convinced them that their investigation was over. The rest of the lunch period passed in comfortable conversation about normal teenage things. Homework, teachers, weekend plans. It felt wonderful to be just a regular student talking to a friend, not someone harboring impossible secrets. That afternoon, walking home from school, I took a detour past the storm drain where I'd last seen Whimzel. The grating was still there, but when I knelt down and peered inside, there was no trace of the tiny creature that had hidden there. Just empty concrete and shadows. "I hope you're happy," I whispered into the darkness. "I hope you're home." The ring on my finger pulsed once with warm light, and I could have sworn I heard the faintest chiming sound like tiny bells carried on the wind. At home, I found my parents in the kitchen, actually cooking dinner together instead of just reheating leftovers. They were laughing about something, and the tension that had been thick in our house for weeks seemed to have lifted. "Hey, sweetie," Dad said as I came in. "How was school?" "Good," I said, and realized I meant it. "Really good, actually." "I'm glad to hear that," Mom said. "We've been worried about you. The move has been hard on all of us, but you seem to be having the toughest time." "I'm adjusting," I said. "I think I'm finally starting to feel at home here." "That's wonderful," Dad said. "And speaking of home, your mother and I have some news." My stomach clenched. "Were we moving again already?" "The company offered me a permanent position," Dad continued. "Full benefits, stable schedule, and we can put down real roots here. No more transfers." "We're staying?" I asked, hardly daring to believe it. "We're staying," Mom confirmed. "If that's okay with you. I know you've been reluctant to unpack." "It's more than okay," I said, and surprised myself by meaning it completely. A month ago, the thought of staying in Millbrook permanently would have devastated me. Now, it felt like coming home. That evening, I finally unpacked the last of my boxes. As I arranged my books on the shelves and hung my photos on the walls, I thought about how different everything looked now. The same room that had felt like a temporary prison a few weeks ago now felt like a sanctuary. When I came across the shoebox I'd prepared for Whimzel, lined with soft fabric scraps, I felt a pang of sadness. But it was a sweet sadness, like missing a friend who'd moved away to somewhere wonderful. I was about to put the box away when I noticed something glinting in one corner. I reached in and pulled out a single translucent wing scale, no bigger than a sequin. It caught the light and threw tiny rainbows across my ceiling. "You left me a present," I whispered, holding the scale up to the lamp. As I watched, the scale began to glow with the same soft light as my ring. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw a tiny figure dancing in the light. Wings spread, colors shifting through every shade of joy and friendship. Then the vision faded, but the warmth remained. I placed the wing scale carefully in my jewelry box, next to my grandmother's ring. Two treasures from two different worlds, both of them connecting me to something magical. Over the following weeks, life in Millbrook settled into a new rhythm. I made friends with Marcus and his group, joined the school's art club, and even started helping my parents plan some real renovations for our house. The constant low-level anxiety that had plagued me since the move was gone, replaced by a sense of belonging I'd never experienced before. Sometimes late at night, I would hold my ring up to the moonlight and watch it glow. In those quiet moments, I felt connected to something vast and wonderful. To Whimzel in its dimension of floating islands and dancing lights, to the magic that existed in the spaces between worlds, to the part of myself that had been brave enough to help a friend find its way home. The strange energy effects Marcus had mentioned continued for several weeks. Electronics throughout Millbrook worked better than they ever had. Plants grew more vibrantly, and people reported sleeping better and feeling more optimistic. The local news attributed it to solar flare activity or some other scientific explanation. But I knew the truth. Whimzel's journey home had left a gift behind, a reminder that magic existed, that friendship mattered more than fear, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is help someone find where they belong, even if it means saying goodbye. One evening, about a month after Whimzel had gone home, I was sitting by my bedroom window doing homework when I heard a familiar sound. Faint chiming, like tiny bells carried on the wind. I looked up to see a shooting star streaking across the Oregon sky, but this one was different. Instead of the usual white trail, it pulsed with colors, gold and green and silver and blue, cycling through shades that reminded me of joy and friendship and love. As I watched, the star seemed to pause directly overhead, pulsing once with brilliant light before continuing on its path across the heavens. "Hi, Whimzel," I whispered, touching my ring. "I miss you too." The ring pulsed warmly against my finger, and I knew that wherever Whimzel was, in whatever dimension of dancing lights and floating islands, it was happy. It was home. And so was I. For the first time since moving to Millbrook, I was exactly where I belonged. Not because of the place, but because of who I'd become. Someone brave enough to help a friend, strong enough to keep a secret, and open enough to believe in magic when it appeared in my life. I looked out at the stars and smiled, knowing that somewhere among them, a tiny creature with color-changing skin and chiming wings was probably showing off for its friends, telling them about the human girl who'd helped it find its way home. And maybe, just maybe, planning its next visit. I could hope, anyway. The end.